Hello everyone and welcome to the Red Channel. In today's video, we're talking about a very important motorcycle in the KTM lineup, partly because the Duke name it bears on its side panels has become a historic name for Mattighofen. In fact, the very first street bike ever made by KTM was a Duke. And it was always a Duke that was the first to feature the LC8C engine, which is also the star of this model. That's why the 790 Duke is a motorcycle that is held in high regard at Mattighofen. But that's not all. The battle in the naked segment, which we can now somewhat inaccurately call entry-level, has become quite heated. And with this bike, KTM wants to reaffirm its role as a leader. A leader not just in terms of power, since now others have also reached 95 horsepower and in fact some have even gone beyond that, but in terms of chassis and technological refinement. Don't believe it? If you have the patience to follow me for the next few minutes of this video, I'll explain where and how KTM has worked to achieve the result you see here in front of you. First of all, let me quickly address what hasn't changed. The starting platform is the same as the previous bike, and by platform I mean the frame, engine and swing arm. The LC8C parallel twin engine has in fact been fully retained, with its 95 horsepower and 87 Newton meters of torque. It is, without a doubt, one of the most high-performing engines in its class. Everything has been confirmed for it, including the electronic throttle with 4 riding modes, the slipper clutch, and the traction control managed by the inertial platform. The new feature is that the engine is now painted black to better blend in with the bike's design. As you can see, the design has changed quite a bit, becoming much closer to that of its bigger sisters, the 990 and 1390, bikes from which the 790 also inherits the distinctive lighting signature of the front headlight. The rear subframe has also changed. Like on the 990, it is made from a single piece of aluminum and is the main reason for the weight reduction of the new 790, which now claims to be 2 kilograms lighter than the previous version, weighing in at 185 kilograms with a full 13.5 liter. The most important changes therefore come from the ergonomics and the chassis. The ergonomics of the 790 have in fact been completely redesigned, with higher and more rear set foot pegs, a much better contoured area to fit around the new 13.5 liter tank, and a seat that remains at 825 millimeters high, but is now shaped differently to make it easier to reach the ground. The handlebar is also new, flatter with risers that can now be adjusted by rotating them to bring the handlebar closer to or farther from the rider. In short, it really seems that the 790 has moved closer to the 990, not only in terms of visual impact, but also in its ergonomic triangle. There are many good things to report in the chassis department. The WP Apex 43 fork is now adjustable for hydraulics, compression on the left stanchion, rebound on the right. The rear shock changes a bit less compared to the previous one, but gains 10 millimeters of travel to improve comfort. I should note that there is no linkage here. The suspension travel is very generous, almost more like a crossover than a naked, 150 millimeters for the front wheel and even 170 for the rear wheel. This is classic for KTM, which loves generous suspension travel, but these are definitely unusual numbers for this type of bike. Everything is complemented by tires that are finally up to the task, Pirelli Diablo Rosso 4. Among the welcome features is also the steering damper, but perhaps one of the most important things is that the 790 Duke also marks a major debut. I'm talking about the braking system branded WP. Yes, because probably tired of hearing that the braking systems installed on the Dukes weren't that effective, KTM decided to make its own braking system in-house. A radial master cylinder, 4-piston radial calipers and 300mm diameter discs characterize the front braking system, but WP also signs the rear system, both the master cylinder and caliper, which act on a 240mm disc, though this one is made by Galfer. And with this, let me say, KTM performs another small act of strength, because shopping in the technical suppliers market is actually quite simple, but it definitely limits you in development, forcing you to follow the timeline set by the suppliers who don't have you as their only client. If, on the other hand, you do everything in-house, you have, so to speak, the keys to the machine in your hands, you can do whatever you want. However, doing everything in-house is certainly not easy, so will the WP system be on par with the best systems we know? Now I'm going to test the bike and I'll tell you how it performs, as well as everything else, but in the meantime, I'll give you another couple of pieces of information that I think are interesting. For KTM, the 790 Duke is the 2027 model, but the bike will already be available in July 2026, and the price is identical to that of the model currently on sale. 8,590 euros dealer price. The tech pack is excluded. It is no longer active for the first 1,500 kilometers and you have to purchase it separately. But honestly, With such features and such a price, there's really little to complain about. Now I'm going to test it out, and I'll also tell you how it rides.
Okay, here we are on the saddle of the new 2027 790 Duke. Let's see what you find in front of you when you get on board Matti Goffen's Naked. First of all, the instrumentation, the layout of the instruments. So the little box it's housed in is different because you can see that the screen tends to be curved, right? But the information displayed inside is similar, if not identical, to that of the previous bike with the tachometer. This is the fuel level indicator with the remaining range, all the service warning lights at the top, and at the bottom this bar that can be easily configured to keep the information you want to see at a glance. Here you have the selected mapping, the ABS mode, and the traction control, which in this mapping we have easily deactivated. To access the mappings, as you saw, you use the classic left-hand switch cluster. Here there's also the cruise control, which can be purchased separately. As I mentioned before, here there's also the cruise control, which can be purchased separately here. Below there's the joystick to adjust the cruise control, so you can set the speed when cruise control is active or adjust the traction control when you're in track mode mapping. So let's say going back to our starting dashboard. Left button to enter the menu, left button again for ride mode, left button. So again, 3 clicks to get to changing the mappings, which are rain, street, sport, and track. The track mapping can be configured by choosing the throttle response and the level of anti-wheelie, which can be high, very high, or completely off, very low. So let's say starting from the least anti-wheelie, meaning the most effective anti-wheelie, very low, medium, very high. And then you can even flip over if you turn it off, or the anti-launch control, the ABS, which can be set to supermoto or road mode, and the quick shifter, which in this case we have active, either enabled or disabled. So the track mapping is the map that can be customized in every way. When you change the riding mode to track, you see here by using the joystick control, I can lower the traction control. When you switch to the track map, the display also changes to one that's more dedicated to the track, where the most important information is the gear indicator. The gear engaged, the tachometer, and the lap time. You can also activate a second screen called the telemetry screen, where you can see the lean angles, meters, seconds of acceleration, how much throttle I'm opening, how much braking, and therefore how many meters per second of braking I'm able to achieve. It's quite an interesting screen. Let's go back to our normal ride mode. The interesting thing is that since there are 3 clicks, we've always kind of criticized the fact that to change the mapping, you always have to go through a rather long process. KTM has already introduced the C button for a while now, which is also on the 790, and it serves as a sort of shortcut. You can set it up within the system configuration, see custom switch. In this case, I selected ride mode, but you can assign different functions to it. So this is a shortcut button that, when I press it, lets me go straight to the ride mode menu and change it super quickly. So this is really, really good. Other interesting things, obviously the risers are adjustable. They can be rotated to move the handlebars forward or backward by 5 millimeters, which is great for taller or shorter riders. This way, you can better adapt the riding position, and the more adjustable the riding positions are, the more I like it. There are VP levers, both for the brake and the clutch. Finally, matching levers. They are identical in their construction. And you know that Pateme has always had levers, sometimes different ones, for the brake and clutch with a radial pump. The micrometric adjustment on both is interesting. So here you can really fine-tune them to the millimeter. VP suspension. So obviously with the adjustable fork, with the classic adjuster knobs that you can even use to adjust the bike while riding if you want, because there are only 5 clicks. Let's say the philosophy is the same as the 990, fewer clicks but more effective ones. Compression on the left side, rebound on the right side. More or less that's everything you can see on the bike. The instrumentation, as you can see now, is clearly visible. Today it's cloudy, but when the sun is behind you, maybe the visibility should be a bit better. Cruise control is activated with the button, of course. Then with the slider below, you can adjust the speed. There's no extra travel. It simply turns off by braking or pulling the clutch, but the exit from cruise control is quite smooth. I'd say that's everything you can see from on board. Not bad, considering the price of the bike. There's attention to detail, even if, let's say, the stickers aren't under clear coat, though. Anyway, anodized handlebar, double coned. In short, there's good stuff. There's plenty on board. Let's go see how it rides.
Okay, it's time to draw some conclusions about the new 790 Duke. It has a lot of good things going for it, but I'd like to start by saying one thing. Welcome back, Pirelli. After years of having so-so tires on the 790, today, on this day when we tested the 790 Duke on the Grossglockner with 6 degrees, not exactly warm, and sometimes a bit of rain, I have to say that having tires like these really changes your life. A chassis like this deserves good tires because it's a high-level chassis. So, well done KTM for listening not only to our feedback, which was all negative about the previous tires, but also to those who actually bought the bike. I have to say that there has been excellent work done, even in terms of the perceived quality of the bike. The only thing I feel like pointing out are the passenger foot peg brackets, which are basically just some metal tubing. In short, not exactly high quality. But apart from that, everything else has really turned out very well. I'll start with the riding position, which, thank you, it's definitely one of the things that has changed the most. There's a lot of the 990 in the new 790 Duke, a seat that really reminds me a lot of the 990s with firm padding. Yes, but it's also comfortable to sit on. Now, once you're on the bike, the handlebar is a bit lower, the foot pegs are set a little further back and a bit higher, so you end up in a more forward-leaning position. The handlebar, however, has ends that slope down a bit, and maybe I would prefer it just a little bit straighter. That said, it's a riding position that lets you spend many hours in the saddle without getting too tired. But at the same time, it gives you the right amount of control. When you start pushing in sporty riding, even maybe on the track, that's something you didn't have before on the 890 and 790. Let's say that on those bikes, you were a bit more on top of the bike, kind of motard style, whereas here you're more inside the bike, like on the 990, a bit more like a true naked. So apart from the ends, which are a bit droopy, I have to say I like everything else. The grips too, which have high grip and are very nice ergonomically. The new WP levers, which are very curved but have this micrometric adjustment that lets you fine-tune them to the millimeter. You can really adjust the distance of the brake and clutch levers. While I'm at it, I'll talk right away about the brakes, which is a hot topic considering the 790, 890, and even the 990. We've always criticized the braking system, not considering it quite up to the performance level of the bike. The work done by WP, so let's say KTM since they did it in-house. The braking system is of good quality. It's a system that I approve of, though I wouldn't give it top marks. I'll explain why in a moment, but it sits in the middle range of the braking systems that I test. Things I like. Definitely the front brakes modulation and power. You can pull it with just one finger and get a good braking effect, so compared to before, it's really like night and day. What convinces me a little less is that the lever tends to feel a bit stiff when you reach the pressure point. This also happens with the rear brake, which in my opinion is a bit less effective than I would like. But overall, the system has really allowed the bike to make a big step forward. So I approve the WP system for its modulation and absolute power. When I reach the pressure point, I would like it to be a little less abrupt, a bit more progressive. That's all. Since I'm talking about the chassis, I'll continue with that. I give full marks to the fork. I liked it. I find it very similar to the fork on the 990. Few clicks, but effective. This morning I opened it up, and here you can do it quickly with the knobs to adjust the compression. Since we were in a very cold situation, I preferred to let it work a bit more. I wanted the fork to work more, to feel the front end a little lower. The clicks are really effective, so when you adjust the setup, the bike responds and I immediately felt better. A fork like a shock absorber with great travel, which in this case is used well by KTM, giving the initial part of the travel the comfort you need. So it's easy to get the suspension moving, easy to absorb small bumps without sending harsh jolts to your back. And so all of this greatly increases the riding feel, which however doesn't diminish later on. When you start to push, so when you begin to pick up the pace, because the fork is like a shock absorber, you still find the right support. So let's say having extended the travel. The 170 millimeters of rear travel is really a lot, truly crossover level travel, and it gives you that initial comfortable part. And in the second part, where you engage the shock and fork, you get just the right amount of support. And here too, there are similarities with the KTM 990. If you haven't seen the video about the 990, I recommend you go watch it. I'll put it up here because you'll find that I was saying pretty much the same things, but with something extra. Here, the braking system is definitely better. One thing I feel I should point out, still talking about the chassis, is that the 790 Duke hasn't just become similar to the 990 in terms of looks, but also in its attitude on the road. The bike may have lost a bit of that hyper agility it used to have, but in return it has gained a lot of stability, a much stronger presence on the road, thanks in part to the Diablo Rosso 4 Corsa tires, but also the steering damper. It's a bike with a more mature ride, more like a naked sportier, and in my opinion it's easier to go faster with it. I'm happy to trade a little bit of that hyper speed and playfulness, if you will, for better front-end feedback, which you definitely get here. As I mentioned, I really like the ergonomics. The seat height is 825 millimeters, but you can still touch the ground well with both feet, at least with your toes. I'm 1.71 meters tall and I can reach the ground comfortably. The positive thing KTM has done is to redesign this entire area where you grip the bike. Here, everything is very smooth. There are no pressure points or uncomfortable contact points. You can really feel the bike well. Let's say that the previous 790 was super slim in this area, and this one has remained very slim. But with the previous 790 to 890, you almost lost it between your knees. Here, you can really feel the bike, so it gives you much more feedback. There's enough space even to move your feet around, as you can see just on the right side here, where the exhaust is. Basically, it gets a bit in the way with your heel, the exhaust, which, by the way, is much nicer than before. There are no welds. In short, it's well made, so there's a lot of attention to detail. But I have to say that the entire ergonomic aspect has really taken a very, very important step forward. So after talking about the chassis, which proves with facts that it has a level of expertise that's a bit rare to find in this segment, even something as simple as the adjustable fork. By segment, I mean bikes with 95 horsepower that can be detuned for an A2 license. So we're talking about the GSX-8R, the Z650, the MT-07. We're talking about a bike that really raises the performance to another level. Before we wrap up, let's quickly address the engine topic quickly because as we know, the engine is essentially unchanged. The new feature is that it's now Euro 5 plus compliant, but so was the engine in the 2026 version. 87 Newton meters of torque, 95 horsepower. I'd like to remind you that the engine is also available. So, in fact, the 790 Duke is offered in other non-European markets in a 105 horsepower version, but in Europe, only the 95 horsepower version is available, so it can be restricted for the A2 license. But that's not what makes the difference. It's not the horsepower, believe me. In this case, we're talking about 87 Newton meters of torque, which is the most interesting figure for this bike. It's a figure that puts it at the top of its segment in this category, beaten only by the Ducati Monster, which has 110 horsepower but also has an engine that's 890 cubic centimeters, almost 100 cubic centimeters more than this one, so it's clear that gives it an advantage. That said, it's really between those two. The others are all a bit lower in terms of torque. I'll quickly address the engine topic by telling you that of the 4 power modes, so the 4 throttle responses available on this engine, which are rain, street, sport, and track. The rain mode is definitely very, very subdued, very saturated, but that's fine for a rain map, so let's say it's appropriate. I found the street mode to be rather filtered. I like it when I'm riding around a bit in traffic because the throttle is in fact a bit more filtered, so when you hit bumps while riding 2 up, the bike responds more smoothly. I find the sport mode to be quite responsive at the very first twist of the throttle, and by very first twist I mean the first 10 degrees, but then what happens after that isn't linear. In the end, even though I'm not exactly a fan of this type of mapping, I appreciated the track mode, which is as responsive as sport, maybe even a bit more, but it's more linear, more honest, let's say, as you continue to open the throttle, giving me the response I'm looking for. So it's definitely a more direct map, but on this engine, in my opinion, it manages to be very, very effective. I liked it. So when I'm riding more aggressively, I choose the track map. When I'm riding more calmly in the city, the street map is the one I prefer. Then, of course, the track riding mode can be configured with all the responses you want. So in the end, you can do pretty much whatever you like. You choose it and set up the bike however you prefer. A classic feature of this engine is definitely the gearbox, which is always a bit stiff, a hallmark of the LC8C. It's something that both Marco and I constantly point out every time we test a bike equipped with this engine. The gearbox is stiff whether you use it with the clutch, which by the way I have to say is very soft and very precise at the bite point, so I liked it, or when you use it without the clutch but without the quick shifter, which I remind you is not standard here. Even when you use it a bit with the quick shifter, it's still stiff. So let's say this characteristic of the gearbox being a bit stiff is always present. It's a classic KTM trait, a classic of the LC8C. We've gotten somewhat used to it, so in the end it's nothing new. And regarding the riding modes, I also want to point out the engine braking, which in my opinion is perfectly calibrated on this bike in all the maps you can use. I like it both going downhill and uphill. In other words, whether you're riding uphill or downhill, there's always just the right amount of engine braking. The bike is managed in the right way. It's an engine brake that I find very well balanced. Obviously, the on-off effect is practically absent, so when I close the throttle completely, go into a corner and then get back on the gas, the response is always smooth, sometimes a bit sharper, sometimes more decisive depending on the riding mode we're using, but never with that abrupt on-off feeling. I have to say, there are also very few vibrations for an inline twin of this kind. Vibrations start to appear around 6,500 RPM on the foot pegs and a bit on the tank when the engine is under load. It should be noted, however, that at those revs we're well above highway speeds, well over 130 kilometers per hour, because at 130 kilometers per hour this engine runs at about 5,000 RPM. I'll also finish with the fuel consumption. Let me open the dashboard because I don't remember it anymore. Today we did a ride of almost 200 kilometers along the Alpine passes here in Austria. Fuel consumption, as indicated by the onboard computer, I couldn't measure it directly since I didn't fill up, is 4.8 liters per 100 kilometers, so let's say it's an engine that overall doesn't consume much. So to wrap up and summarize, 8,590 euros is the starting price. If we add all the available electronic options, that's about 800 euros more, 799 euros to be exact. So we end up at around 9,400 euros. In my opinion, that's still a very competitive price because the package KTM offers in terms of chassis, engine and performance is clearly at the top of the category it belongs to. What I want to know from you is which bikes you think are the direct competitors of this KTM 790 Duke, because among my colleagues there was a lot of debate about this. Clearly it fits into the A2 segment, so we're talking about the Hornet, the GSX-8S and the MT-07, which are obviously its direct competitors in terms of price. There's also the CF Moto 800 NK and even the CF Moto 675, but in my opinion that goes a bit beyond considering the performance. Then you get to the Monster, which obviously costs a bit more, not just a little, almost 5,000 euros, about 4,000 euros more. But in terms of performance, these two bikes are definitely comparable. Let me know down below in the comments which bikes you think are the direct competitors of this motorcycle, which in my opinion has now really made a huge leap forward, not only in terms of riding position, but also in chassis quality, which was already high, but has now improved even further, as well as in terms of comfort and usability in everyday life. I'll be waiting for you down here in the comments. Let me know what you think about the 790 Duke and all its so-called entry-level competitors, because at this point, there's really not much that's entry-level about them anymore. Leave your comments below and we'll see each other in the next video. Now I'm heading back to the hotel before it starts raining again, because here in Austria, with all this greenery, there must be a reason for it, right? Of course, it's raining. See you in the next video.